Welcome to today's VPS session, product session on VPS. We're going to have a great session led by our Senior Product Manager on VPS, Tory Smith. Before I do that, I'm going to go into a few reminders. Remember that we are recording, so if you don't want your face shown, please turn off your cameras. Otherwise, please feel free to share your camera. I would love to see you guys on screen. Remember to mute yourself, and if you have any questions and you would like to speak, just use the raise hand feature and we'll call on you. And there's always a chat box if you like to ask any questions or just comment on anything. We'll love to see what you guys have to say. Big announcement. You guys may already know from our Discord, but we have officially announced monthly mini jams. These are really small build-a-thons where we want to see you guys up and running with Lightship. There's going to be a monthly theme. There's going to be about 2 weeks of submissions and then a week of judging. And what's really special about this is the community votes. So voting is based on 4 criteria: the theme, which can be a creative theme or a technical theme. This month, we've left it really broad. So go ahead and check out the theme for this month in Discord. And then the next criteria is innovation as well as Niantic mission. We want to know how your build aligns with our mission and values, and as well as the completeness. So if you have more questions about criteria, you guys can let me know or just check out our Discord. And then moving on to prizes, we have awesome prizes for this. We actually officially announced additional prizes yesterday on Discord. So along with the Discord winner badge, we have a spotlight for Discord posts as well as a Lightship swag jacket. So there's some background behind the swag jacket is that the art on is actually from our first challenge winners. So it's actually pretty meaningful if you're part of our Lightship community and then know that's history. We also have a $200 cash prize. Lightship Summit Pass for next year. It's a huge conference where you will learn all about the updates about Lightship ARDK and then private access to anything beta. So this is a grand prize for the monthly winners. And this may change month to month, but this is the prize for this month, September. And if you have any questions, just feel free to ask me in the chat or reach out to me in Discord. Monthly announcements. So we did extend the extension for the September mini jam to next week, so September 26th. Please have your submissions in by 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then next week, Tuesday, we actually have a Dev Day workshop. We're going to be working with our partner engineer, Jamika, on building with a VPS. So we're going to skip the scanning part. You're going to have to do some pre-work with downloading the POI ahead of time, but we're going to get you guys up and running with VPS. And then we're also going to have a brown bag session hosted by 2 speakers. We're going to have a SpotX Web3 speaker, give you guys an overview of Web3 NFTs in AR. And then we actually have one of our managed partners, Muse Studio. We're going to talk about how they've been using NFTs, specifically music royalties, in their AR. So hope you guys can check that out. Please RSVP in our events platform. And then again, if you guys have questions, we are collecting questions through Slido. Please take out your phones and scan this QR code now, or you can go to slido.com or Slido actually, and enter the code. I'll leave the link in the chat throughout the session if anyone comes in late or can't open up this app right now. Without further ado, I want to welcome our speaker, Tory Smith. He is our expert on Lightship VPS. And before we actually have Tory share his screen and begin, I want to kind of ask you guys, I'm going to open up a poll right now. What is your experience with VPS? So go ahead and just select what you feel is applies to you most. If you've never used it before, but you're interested in it, if you try it out once, but you're not really sure about it. Yeah, let's see. I'll give you guys a few moments to fill that out. Okay. Interesting. Okay, 10 seconds. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to see a few of you guys have used VPS, but majority of you guys haven't used VPS before and you're really interested in this. So I hope that today's product session, you guys can have some of your questions. So, Tori, I'm gonna stop screen share.
All right. Cool. Thanks for creating that poll. That's actually really helpful context for me. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. All right. Chanel, can I get a quick thumbs up if you can see this?
I can't see it yet, but my
We can see it.
Cool. All right. Let's do this. Hi, everyone. My name is Tory. Thank you for the intro, Chanel. So I am the Group Product Manager at Niantic, in charge of all things maps. And first and foremost for me, what I've spent most of my time at Niantic working on is VPS. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I know we have...
So can anyone else get...
Hey, yeah, we can all, I think everyone can hear me.
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. All right, so the context is helpful. I think this presentation is actually going to be really helpful for folks that have not used VPS yet and are interested, as well as folks who have used it a little bit or a lot. I obviously fall into the a lot category. And what I'm going to be talking about today is not really about like code level or Unity integration level details, but much more about how the product is used today, some of the updates since we launched in May, and then spend a lot of time talking about the future. So let's go ahead and dive in. So as I mentioned, we'll start with like basically where we are now, including a lot of changes in the past 3 or so months in terms of like increases in coverage, a few improvements to some of the APIs. But what I really want to spend a lot of time talking about is tomorrow. And what I'm most excited about in this presentation is for us, tomorrow is our ability to very quickly respond to a lot of the feedback that we've gotten from you all since we launched in May. So I'm going to be talking about several of the major improvements that we have in the pipeline right now that are going to be launching in the next 3 to 6 months. There's actually some big stuff that's actually launching like in a week. So some really big changes, exciting changes coming to the whole Lightship ecosystem, but especially any type of content that has location context. So starting with VPS today. So I think this might be especially helpful for folks that have not used it yet. Over here in this slide, I'm just showing a couple examples from, this was our launch event in May. And like really the differentiator for us at Niantic in terms of what you are able to do with VPS is create content that is persistent, meaning that you can have the same content interacted with across different times and between different users. So another big thing you get from VPS that makes it a little bit different from other products out there is you can see that we not only tell you exactly where you are in the world, but we also tell you exactly what you are looking at, which means like sort of this first video, you see this ship flying in and anchoring onto an anchor, and the precision that you're able to get. So you can see that anchor chain is landing directly on the tip of the anchor. So that's like within a couple centimeters in real world space. And this type of experience means that you can create objects that persist over time. And those experiences can be extremely accurate. And what I'm going to be talking about a little bit more later today is how these experiences can be scaled to show up in even more places and also be able to create these experiences without needing to travel to these specific locations. The second video here is just showing another way of creating content. So this is using the same concept. So we've localized, the user here that's walking around has localized, but even if there is only a small space at which you localize, you can still render content that extends very far in different directions. So for this particular example, this was something that was built by the developer Liquid City based in London. For anyone that caught our keynote, Keiichi Matsuda is the director of that studio. He and his team built this for our launch event. And they built this gigantic AR structure in this environment that extended out hundreds of meters. And there's also a separate demonstration they built where you could look into the horizon and actually see labels on all the buildings in the San Francisco skyline. So there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do. And even though like a typical VPS location today is about 10 meters or so in diameter, that doesn't mean that you can only render content in that space. You can actually render content as far away as the eye can see. So there's some really cool stuff on the horizon, literally, no pun intended, that we're going to be able to add with a lot of these concepts I'm going to be talking about today. So again, providing a little more context, especially since there's some folks here that are new to VPS. VPS is what is like really most developer facing. However, there are really, when we talk about the concept of building a map and using the map for AR, there's really three different pillars. So the first is actually data collection and processing. That's all the way over on the left. And what I've done on this slide is sort of shown the difference between what are the developer experiences that apply to these three different pillars, and then what are the user experiences that apply to these three pillars. So all the way to the left is data collection and processing. So if you're a developer today, you're probably working with our developer portal, which is where you log in on lightship.dev. And then that's also where you're able to get a link to download the Wayfarer app. So that's what I'm showing all the way over here on the left. This is just an example of scanning a location with the Wayfarer app. And the scanning piece is actually collecting a whole bunch of video frames along with pose information. And these scans are the building blocks from which we're able to construct our AR map of the world. If you're a user today or a player, there have been scanning interfaces built into Pokemon Go as well as Ingress for years. And what's really exciting about the launch of VPS is now we can finally turn all those contributions from our users in the form of millions and millions and millions of AR scans into the ability to localize in the real world and have these AR experiences at those locations. So this whole middle step, you can see I just have kind of grayed out here. That's because you as developers, you don't need to build a map. We build that for you and provide that as a service. So we take all these scans, process them, anonymize them, make sure that they're securely stored and formatted, and then we build these models that run on our servers that basically take a single frame that you send to us and then return your exact location in the real world metaverse. So that's what this third column is. The third column is all about VPS. So today, if you're building with VPS, that means you're doing it with Lightship ARDK, which is also available through lightship.dev. And VPS, we have all the example code and everything that runs inside of that. And the Lightship ARDK has things like depth and occlusion and semantics and all sorts of tutorials for how you can get up and running. And then if you're building a location-based experience inside of Lightship ARDK, VPS is the service that you call through ARDK in order to build those experiences. So today you'll be interfacing with the ARDK as a Unity developer. And then we also have our first cohort of VPS apps that are available. So coming soon, there's probably going to be more and more examples of how VPS is being used in Pokemon Go and Ingress, and then as well as a lot of third-party apps that today are sort of in beta, but probably going to be launching over the next couple months. And I'll also show a couple examples of some recent things that have been built at hackathons. So that's basically where we are today with these three pillars. And again, today's mostly going to focus on the third pillar, which is actually building with VPS. In terms of coverage, this is like one of the big challenges that we have with VPS. I think a good way to think about what we're doing right now is building infrastructure. It's almost like deploying fiber optic cables or Wi-Fi hotspots or 5G internet access. We're really focusing on first bringing VPS coverage to places where it will have the most impact. And when we think about impact at Niantic, we think about where will it have the most number of developers, where will we have the most players, and where we're going to have the most people to actually interact with that content. So when we launched in May, we were in about 10 cities with an extra high focus on our 6 launch cities, which were San Francisco, New York, LA, Seattle, London, and Tokyo. And what I'm showing here on this map is since we had that first dozen or so cities, we've actually dramatically increased our coverage over time. We've done this with a combination of contributions from developers, contributions from our players, and then some support from our internal operations teams as well. So in the 3 or 4 months since we launched VPS at the end of May, we have gone from 10 cities to about 60 cities that have VPS coverage. We've gone from 30,000 VPS activated locations to over 100,000 VPS activated locations. And the number of people in the world that have access to these locations has increased from 30 million to over 150 million. And when I say access, that means that you can, from wherever you are, you can walk to a location that is activated on VPS in less than 5 minutes. So without needing to get into a car, without needing to get on a train, a bus, or anything, like you can actually just walk outside, and within 5 minutes, you are at a location where you can interact with AR content. And that's a really important and meaningful number for our developers as you think about your ability to create content and then scale that. So this is just one slide to sort of illustrate that. And this is going to be one of the things I'm most passionate about, is continuing to improve the ability of developers and users to quickly engage and then scale with how that engagement works with the metaverse. And then another thing, obviously, as we talk about more mapped areas, is this flywheel concept. So for many years, Niantic was just a game company. For the past 2 or 3 years, we have also become a platform company. And with any platform, what you're really trying to harness is this flywheel effect, which is taking this set of tools that we use to build our like flagship titles like Pokemon Go and Pikmin Bloom and Ingress, and take a lot of those building blocks and make those available for developers. In order for those to be useful, we have to share a lot of that infrastructure. So VPS is a really good example of that. So by bringing more of these areas online, we enable both our internal game teams as well as all of you to create great AR experiences, to get more player engagement, which also feeds more UGC data back into the system. In terms of what has gotten us to get to the point where we're at today with VPS, the AR scans that many of you are probably familiar with that you're able to do in games like Pokemon Go are really the foundation that has allowed us to sort of jumpstart this experience. It would be very difficult for any of you as developers to add, hundreds or thousands or even dozens of scans all over the world to make all these locations available. So what we're doing is we're building one giant shared map that any developer can use, and we make available to you as developers the exact same set of data that we're using ourselves to build these experiences in the real world. And what's really exciting about that is as we enable our own success, we're also enabling your success, and we will all share the bounty of more UGC that we use to increase the size of that map over time. So that's one of the biggest motivating factors for us in building one big shared map for VPS. So what that means is we're not going to just build a map that only Pokemon Go gets to use or only Ingress gets to use. It's actually a map that everyone can use, and it's one big shared ecosystem. So that's sort of where we are today. What I want to talk about next is where we're going next. So for VPS tomorrow, what I'm going to talk about are a whole bunch of new features that are probably going to be available for public beta, which means anyone on this call will be able to use them before the end of this year, which is super exciting, as well as a few features that are going to be coming a little bit after that. But what I'm most excited about are the things that you're not going to have to wait years or even half a year for. The things that we have working, in some cases already working internally, and are going to be available to put into your hands in like weeks or months from now, which is really exciting. So I've highlighted, again, using the same framework I used a few slides ago. These are some of the existing tools, and then if it's bolded or highlighted, that means these are things that are new. So 4 things that I've called out on this page. First is the AR scanning module. So anyone here who's built with VPS before, you've probably used the Wayfarer app. What we're actually doing is taking the scanning part of the Wayfarer app and turning that into a module that you can put into your game. What that means, or your application, what that means is if you want players in your game to be able to add new locations to the map or upload scans or create meshes of locations that they can see on their device, we're actually going to bring that out of the Wayfarer app and into a module that you can put into any application. The next thing I'm going to talk about is remote content authoring. This is probably the biggest deal, the thing I'm most excited about. And remote content authoring is taking the problem of, okay, great, I have an AR experience that I'm really excited about, and I've made it work at this one location that is near where I live or near from where I develop from. How do I want to take that and make it work at the next 10 locations or the next 1,000 or even the next 1,000,000 locations? That is a really hard problem today, because if you're building a real world platform, then you want to be able to create an experience that you can scale to lots and lots of different parts of the world so you can reach a larger audience and get more traction with your users and learn more from them. So remote content authoring, which I'm going to give a live demo of today, is the ability for us to take all these different assets that normally you would have to travel to a location to play with and allow you to play with those either in the browser or in Unity Editor. So this is huge. And I'll give a live demo and be happy to take any questions from you all in terms of how that's going to work. The next thing is on the user side. So these are changes that are not directly developer facing, but they're actually going to be huge enablers for your users in terms of how they will be able to interact with the content that you're building. So first is the Wayfarer app, which right now is only available in iOS test flight for all of you. This is another project I have at Niantic. I'll be working with a bunch of different parts of our company to turn the Wayfarer app into a freestanding application that is also available on the public app stores for both iOS and Android, and will bring a lot of the different capabilities that you've experienced as developers to the player community. For anyone here who's high level in Pokemon Go or Ingress, you probably experienced an invitation to the Wayfarer community, which is how we've crowdsourced a lot of the foundational data that makes our games possible. And what we're going to do now is have a dedicated app for that ties together all those different pieces of functionality into a single app that's really easy to use. So I'm really stoked about that. That's really taking a lot of the existing developer functionality and gamifying it, making it a lot smoother and making it easier for a typical user to interface with rather than just AR developers. And then finally, there is going to be VPS for the web. What this means, and I know most folks here are probably Unity developers, but all the stuff that we're building, the infrastructure that we're building on VPS that right now is just used through Unity, will soon be available for the web as well. I'm not going to focus much on that piece yet, but for anyone who listened in to our launch event back in May, that was one of the things that John Hankey, our CEO, was very excited about, is being able to take this VPS system that we launched in May and make it also available to the web, which actually means that users can interact with persistent AR content just through their browser. So if you just open up like Safari or Chrome on your device, you can actually do that without having to download an app, and it just works. And we call that sort of like snackable AR. It's like really small experiences, but again, this single map of the world that we're building for AR is something you will be able to access through Unity or through the web. So I'm not going to talk too much about that today, but that's another really big piece that's coming very soon. So I guess starting with some of the upgrades that I was talking about with the Wayfarer app. Right now, the Wayfarer app is available for any Lightship developer. You can just go to lightship.dev and get a link to download it on test flight. A few of the things that are coming to improve this, other than just general bug fixes and increase in coverage, we're soon going to have something that we call end-to-end wayspot activation. So there are two sort of different types of ways that developers are interacting and getting started with VPS today. The first kind is just using VPS at a public location. So today, those are all wayspots, which are, you probably notice if you are a Pokemon Go player, most wayspots are also Pokestops. And the reason for that is because we get a lot of our best crowdsourced data. And that's by far the largest cohort of users that we have at Niantic is the Pokemon Go community. And they've contributed the plurality of the scans that we have today. So those end up being really great places where you know you're going to have a lot of traffic and where you know we're going to have a lot of UGC data. So that's sort of the first kind, is public locations. There's also the ability, as you're a developer, to create private VPS locations. And what that means is, like, let's say I'm at my apartment and I want to be able to rapidly iterate. So what you can actually do today is you can upload a scan of just some part of your home, or like some part like basically across the street, somewhere very close, that is just private to you. And that is a location where you can do sandboxing. So that capability is still in existence. And then obviously with the Wayfarer app, you're able to see all the public locations. You're able to upload private scans, which are automatically activated. So you can start developing at those locations. And then you can also submit scans for public locations and then test to make sure that VPS is working at a location once it is activated. One of the things I'm most excited about is taking this ability for this third bullet point here, end-to-end VPS activation. What that means is making it possible for a developer to go from a spot on the map that is basically zero, so there's nothing there, to a location that is not only on the map, but is also activated on VPS, and to be able to do all of that end-to-end over the course of several days. Today, there's actually a way for you to nominate new locations, which means send us a bunch of probably not a bunch, but a couple pieces of information about a new location that you want to add as a wayspot. And then after it's activated or after it's added to the map, you're able to upload scans. So we turn those scans into VPS activated locations. But this is really going to be taking that entire process and making it much more concise and easily packaged into this one application. So there'll be more announcements about this soon, but the TLDR here is that it will soon be very, very easy to not only add private locations to the map quickly for your own private development, but also add public locations to the map, which means any of your users will also be able to interact with those experiences that you build. So another thing I want to just clarify, is just a thing sort of about language when we talk about what we do with scans. So there's two different types of data, two different like basic types of data that we create from the scans that are uploaded. The first is the mesh, and the second is what we call a map. So when we say mesh, what we're talking about is the 3D model that is like, you can look at it as a human and understand, oh, okay, that is sort of like the 3D shape of that environment. So if you scan a statue, you can see like a very small version of that statue in AR on your screen. The other thing that we create from that is called the map. And we say the map, we're talking about a mapping where once we've activated that location, if you send us any picture of that location, we can tell you roughly where you are. And the map is the computer vision algorithm that turns one image into what we call your pose. So your position and your orientation at that location in the metaverse. And the AR scanning module that I was just talking about is what is going to enable you as a developer to put AR scanning into your application. So that means that your users will be able to submit scans that can be turned into meshes and maps to expand the coverage of Lightship VPS. So now that I've talked about the concept of one mesh, so one scan turns into a mesh and it turns into a map. But when we talk about building an experience that is robust and like fills up more and more of the world over time, there's this concept of a fused mesh. So one of the most important things about a public location is it is a location where lots of different people can travel to, and all those different people can also submit data. And in this case, they can submit different scans. So what you're seeing on the left here, this is what's called a fused mesh. So these are a whole bunch of different people at different times that have gone to the same location and submitted an AR scan. And what we're able to do is stitch all that information together to build one map that is much more comprehensive. It contains more information, more data, which also means it's going to be more accurate and more reliable for users that are having AR experiences at the location. So one of the things that we're going to be doing and sharing with all of you is any location, any production VPS location or VPS activated location where we have collected all these different scans and added to Lightship VPS, we're actually going to share with you the fused mesh at that location, which basically gives you a perfect 3D model, and you'll be able to do directly author content at that location using this mesh as a reference. And this is really important for remote content authoring that I'm going to talk about in just a second. So it basically allows you to go anywhere in the world that's activated on VPS and start adding content to it, even if you can't travel there physically. So if I'm sitting in San Francisco, where I'm based, I can create content in Barcelona, I can create content in Tokyo, I can create content in Alaska. I can just go wherever I want and start dropping content on the map as long as that location is activated on VPS. And that capability, combined with the ability for developers to add new locations to the map themselves, is going to dramatically improve our ability to scale this over time. So I think this is maybe the most important slide of the whole presentation. So this is also what I'm most excited about. So this concept of remote content authoring. So I'm going to give a live demo of this in just a second, but what I was just talking about and like all those different things that lead up to this are all what's going to make it possible for us to release this concept we call remote content authoring. So imagine you're just like opening up a map of the entire planet, and then you can zoom into anywhere in the world where we have a VPS activated location, pull up a 3D model of it, and then just start building the world that you want to see, and then just click a couple buttons, and then that experience will just exist. And it will exist for anyone that goes to that location, interact with it. But I think this is much more fun if I actually just share it with you live. So why don't I do a quick live demo of this? So this is now on my screen. Okay, I'm going to dismiss this. Okay, great. So this is just a quick demo of what I'm talking about. So let me zoom out a little bit just so you can see where we are. So here's the world. This is the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm specifically zooming in Palo Alto for this demo. So just give you some context. And let's say I'm a developer and I want to build an experience in Palo Alto or Mountain View in this particular demo. So I can zoom in to a location, understand, so here's Stanford's campus. Okay, great. Here's downtown Palo Alto. And each of these little circles on the screen here are locations where we have map data. So let's say, okay, here's California Avenue. I'm going to select this one. And what this is telling me is, okay, it's the intersection of California Avenue and Birch Street. And then over here on the right, okay, great. I've just downloaded a mesh and showing it on the screen. And what we're going to enable developers to do is you can go to any location on the planet that is activated on VPS, and I can just click on that location, get some metadata about that location. So you can see it includes, I can see exactly where this location is, and then I can see a 3D mesh. You can see right here, I can actually download that. So I can start playing around with it in Unity Editor. And I can also, you'll see there's a button here for Create Wayspot Anchor. So wayspot anchors, for those that aren't familiar, is your way of creating like a spatial bookmark. And at that bookmark is where you can place AR content. And with remote content authoring, what you're going to be able to do is instead of having to visit this location physically, you can actually download and understand the context of exactly where this location is and what it looks like in 3D, including what it looks like in color, and then start interacting and publishing content here and like with a couple button presses instead of having to travel to that location. And that means if you've built a really cool experience that works in your neighborhood, it actually becomes really easy to explore the world and figure out other locations where you would want users to be able to interact with that same type of content. So that's the gist of what's going on here. I'm happy to take some questions about this. I'll come back at the end and answer that. So I'll leave this tab open and then just dive right back into the presentation. Let's see, what am I waiting for here? My slides are not loading. Oh, yes, they are. Okay, great. Georeferencing. So, okay, there we go. So georeferencing is one of these last concepts that I wanted to talk about. So right now, the way VPS works is once you localize at a location, the coordinate frame that you're dealing with is all relative to that location. So for example, today, I cannot say, oh, I want to drop, let's say I have a model of my coffee table. I cannot drop a coffee table into the world using a latitude and longitude. I have to drop that coffee table into the world relative to a VPS activated location. With georeferencing, that means that we take every single location that is activated on VPS and we figure out exactly where that location is in the real world. And once that is done, you'll be able to anchor content with world coordinates instead of local coordinates. So another way to think about this is right now, when you place a piece of content, all that we care about is where is that content relative to that object. So it's the difference between knowing, like, let's say you're sitting in your car and you're sitting in the front passenger seat. As long as you're in that car, usually if you're not driving the car, you don't really care. It doesn't really matter to you where the car is. It just matters about like, hey, there's a cup holder over here. Here's the dashboard. Here's the radio if I need to change the volume. With georeferencing, that means you will not only understand where you are in the car, but you'll know exactly where that car is on the road. So extending that concept to the metaverse, that means if you've created a bunch of content, you can actually start placing that content into the world relative to latitude and longitude. And this concept becomes extremely valuable once we think about remote content authoring, because now if, like, let's say I'm at this fountain in Sunnyvale, California, I can build content that's right next to the fountain. But if I wanted like the Eiffel Tower to be somewhere on the horizon, I could just drop the Eiffel Tower into the scene with a latitude and a longitude, and it'll just show up in the right place. And instead of needing to reference everything relative to the local coordinate frame of where that fountain is now anchored into the real world. And that same concept is what I was showing a few slides ago when I was talking about remote content authoring, because every single one of these meshes and maps exists in the real world at that location. And with georeferencing, that means it'll also be correctly aligned to the world coordinate frame of latitude and longitude instead of just being sort of a point in space. So complicated concept, but I think the most important takeaway here is this is going to make it much easier for you as developers to scale your content. All right. Now, last thing I want to do before I switch to, this is sort of the last new thing I wanted to show. This is actually just something that one of our UX engineers built recently. And it is tying together a lot of these different concepts I was just talking about into a single demo. So this uses remote content authoring, it uses georeferencing, it uses fused mesh, and it because of all these different things, we're able to bring in a lot of different types of data to build like a really like cool new type of experience. So before I click play, just to sort of explain what's going on here. This is a demo video. This is right outside our San Francisco office where our UX engineer has localized, which means his name's Ian, and he's localized on VPS, so he knows exactly where he is to within a couple centimeters. And then what he's done is he's georeferenced that location, which means when he localizes, he knows exactly where he is within a couple centimeters in an central Earth fixed coordinate frame. And once you've done that, you can actually take other pieces of geodata that are also described by their location relative to the Earth and bring all that information in as well. So in this case, what he's done is he's also imported data about the 3D buildings. So there's actually a totally free data set on OpenStreetMap or OSM, where he's brought in information about where the buildings are in the scene. And using those buildings, those 3D buildings, he's actually able to occlude this giant Dodi statue that's standing back here. So you can see that's not a perfect outline of the ferry building here, but all these different white lines are sort of showing the skyline in that area. And with that, it's really easy to build sort of like a Godzilla experience. So what this developer has done is he's built sort of a Dodi Godzilla experience. So that's what I'm going to show right here in this video. And then as he's walking around, he's tracking, and he can actually control Dodi as Dodi is walking around down the Embarcadero in San Francisco. So again, all of these lines that you see on the horizon, these are the locations of buildings that are just being imported from OSM. So you can see it's a little bit off in some cases, but it's still close enough. And this is just a prototype. So it's close enough to still be able to do some pretty cool stuff. So now he's got control of Dodi. You can actually have Dodi walk around. And we also have information about like how deep the San Francisco Bay is. So you actually have Dodi like walk up here and like stand in the water. And you can see Dodi is correctly occluded by both the water and the buildings in the area. So at the beginning of the video, you saw Dodi was partly behind the ferry building, but now Dodi is in front of the ferry building. So he is actually showing up standing in the water like this. So this is just sort of like a quick example of like how powerful this is all going to be for you as developers. And again, this is just coming in the next like weeks and months. So I'm really stoked about that. Last couple things I want to talk about before I hopefully leave some time for questions is the VPS World Tour. We were actually just in London this past weekend, but we will be in Seattle in less than 2 weeks. And then we're going to be in New York in October, Los Angeles in November, and coming soon, more information about one additional world city where we will be going out to meet with a lot of you and meet up in person. So there'll be more information on our website. So that's all lightship.dev/VPS World Tour. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to that effort. That's been really fun for me to actually go and meet with a lot of you in person. This is actually from just this past weekend. I just wanted to show a couple examples of some of the stuff that developers have built. This is less than a week old now. So this is actually on the left is an example of a developer that built an experience where you can actually place persistent musical notes in space. And I don't have, unfortunately, I don't have the volume with this video, but imagine this is like a musical score in 3D space where different users can take turns going to the location, then adding more notes, and then playing that music back. So if you built a composition, you could share your composition and then attach that to any real world space. And then over here on the right, so we were actually in London right after Queen Elizabeth II passed away. So someone made a Queen Elizabeth memorial where you could actually go to different parts of London and then see famous speeches that the Queen had made at those locations on like little television sets or on radios. So that was another like really cool way that they built a location-based experience that was really scalable with the Lightship VPS platform. So summary, we've talked about today, we've talked a lot about tomorrow. I just gave a quick shout out to some of the stuff that's been going on with the Dev Roadshow. Again, just to recap, we're going to be in Seattle next week, then New York, then Los Angeles. All the information as well as like how you can sign up or look at past submissions will be available here, lightship.dev/VPS World Tour. And with that, I am going to, I guess, switch to Q&A. I think, Chanel, will you be emceeing the Q&A?
Yes, I will be. So you guys, I'm going to drop the link right once more in the chat. And I'll start off the first question. So is someone asked, and if you guys want to elaborate, feel free to unmute yourself and elaborate on your question. Is it the same as eighth wall when referring to the web?
Yes.
Easy question. Can you state the high-level steps to create a simple VPS experience? For example, taking a scan, uploading the mesh, etc.
Sure. Yes. So there are two different ways to build VPS experiences today. So I'm just going to talk about the current state. And if you haven't, please check out our developer documentation just at lightship.dev. But the high level steps, of course, coming from me as a product manager, started about thinking about all things at a high level. The very first thing you need to do is you need to have a location that is activated on VPS. Because the way the system works is, in order for us to tell you exactly where you are, we need to have a VPS service, which takes a single frame from your device, and then we send that frame up to the cloud, and then the cloud processes and figures out exactly your pose, and we send that pose back to you. And then once that happens, you're able to track around and move in that persistent AR experience. So the end-to-end experience, the very first thing you need to do is you need to be at a VPS activated location. There's two different types of those. The first type is a private location, which just means you as a developer have your own private location, which might be like your kitchen or your living room, your dining room, your front porch. And then you upload a scan of that location. And then within 4 hours, we turn that data into a mesh, which we send back to you so you can understand the 3D structure of that environment, as well as a map, which means now anytime you go to that location, you can actually interact with AR content at that location. So that's the first type, is a private location. But most content like if you want an experience that you can actually share, you need to create a public location, which think of it as like adding a location to the map in a way that everyone can see that. So anyone can interact with AR content that you create. So today, when we say VPS activated locations and wayspots, we're talking about one big shared map for everyone to use. And today, as I mentioned, we have over 100,000 of those locations across about 60 or so cities. So what that means is it's not just your scan, it's scans from millions of different people that have submitted that data or submitted data over different times, different weather conditions, different lighting conditions of those locations. So in that case, that gives you a much more robust experience because it captures a much wider range of what the world looks like at that location. So again, step one, we need to have the scans that have been turned into that map data. Step two is actually anchoring content. So today, there's a bunch of different ways to do that. Again, the documentation is all on lightship.dev. But generally today, that means you have to travel to that location and then be able to drop in a wayspot anchor, which is, again, sort of like a spatial bookmark. And that is what allows you to place a piece of AR content relative to that location. So it tells you sort of the X, Y, and the Z, and then the yaw, pitch, and the roll of whatever object you're placing there. And then that anchor is, that object then gets attached to that anchor. We call those wayspot anchors because they're all relative to wayspots. Again, the way this is going to change in the future, once we have georeferencing, is you'll not only know your position relative to that location, but you'll also be able to query the location of these different anchors with just world coordinates, which is a much more intuitive way to think about things. And then once the location's been scanned, it's been activated, you've placed content, now anyone using your application can go to that location, localize with VPS, and then pull in all the content that's been anchored there and then interact with that content in AR. So that is sort of like the 1, 2, 3 of how to think about it. So you have to activate it, the maps get built, you place the content, and then once that's been done, then you actually go interact with those experiences.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tory. And I've also linked, provided the links to lightship.dev learning documents in the chat for whoever needs it. The next question is, how do you detect outdated map data and incentivize new scans to bring the map up to date?
That is a very good question. That is probably the hardest problem in the world to solve. I often describe map building as a Sisyphean process. So like Sisyphus is like the legend of I forget what he did wrong, but he did something very bad. And his punishment was every single day he had to roll a giant boulder up a hill. And at the end of the day, the boulder rolls back down the hill. So if you describe something as Sisyphean, that means you have to keep doing something, you don't ever accomplish anything. Map building is hard because the world changes every day. Fortunately, one of our biggest advantages at Niantic is that we're building sort of this flywheel where we have millions and millions of players interacting with our games, and the interaction that we have from players, both of our first party games and with the players that you all will have, the people that use your applications, is we get these little pieces of data. Internally, we call this UGC, or user generated content. And naturally, the more popular a location is, the more important it is, and the more data we're going to have at those locations. That's one of the biggest challenges in this space today, One way to solve this problem is to just go out and spend billions of dollars to send people out with data collection rigs and like collect LiDAR data and things like that. That's really difficult and very expensive. We're still like relatively, small startup compared to like a lot of the big players in the game, like Google, for example, who has spent untold billions of dollars to do Street View. And that's sort of the basis of a lot of the location information that they have. We're taking a slightly different approach where we're working primarily with you all. So our developer community and our player community, and we actually can use the signal about where folks are going to play their games to build better data in those locations. But again, I use the word Sisyphean because that job is never done. And one of the biggest things that I'm focused on at Niantic right now is to make it as easy as possible for you as developers to take advantage of what the data that we already have, and then harness the contributions from our players as well as your players over time. But if you look across our portfolio of products for all things mapping, like the Wayfarer community that we have is like one of our most important differentiators, is like having a really engaging way for you as developers as well as players to nominate new locations and then add data at those locations. But the job will certainly never be done, which is why I certainly, when I'm talking about the challenges of VPS, really talk about it as more of an infrastructure problem than a pure technology problem.
Yeah, thanks, Tori, for that. And then another person asked, I see a few VPS locations in my city. Does that mean that there's an experience there, or is there just a high quality scan there?
Great question. Yeah. So on lightship.dev, if you log in and look at, there's a whole page. Actually, I'm not sure my screen anymore. Yeah. So there's on the slide I was showing like the map of the world. So right now on lightship.dev, you can see a map of every single VPS activated location. And that map is only telling you whether that location is available on VPS. It's not telling you whether someone has built an experience there. That's actually an interesting question. So over time, I think one of the things we're considering adding is more information about where have people actually placed AR content. The way that folks interact with AR content today is always through a VPS application. So right now, for example, if you download the Wayfarer app, that is a VPS application. You can open that up and see all the locations that are activated on VPS, but those locations don't necessarily have AR content published yet. So you can think of the VPS layer as sort of like the infrastructure layer, and then whether or not you have built content on top of that. There's not really a view to see all of that yet, but I can see that as being something that we'll have in the future. But it would also depend on you as a developer, whether you want everyone to know that you built a location, like built an experience there or not. You still get control over that.
Thank you, Tori. And this next question comes from Dramano. So if you have anything to elaborate, please unmute yourself, but I'll read it out loud. Can you only place wayspot anchors using the fused mesh as reference through the web portal, or can we author an anchor with the wayspot API in Unity?
Yes, you'll also be able to use this through Unity.
Awesome. Next question, using private scans, can we get the anchors information from running sessions and use them later in Unity?
I believe that capability is going to be added soon with private locations, that anchor information is connected to it directly. I think the answer to that is yes.
Okay. Thank you. And then will the mesh of a wayspot be available for interaction and inclusion?
Yes, it will. Yeah, so that's actually one of the really helpful things that you can do with the mesh information. So like that example I was showing where we had the fused mesh of the fountain. One thing that we've been doing internally, so sort of test VPS, is if you go to that location and localize, you can pull in the fused mesh for your location and then overlay it with slightly with 50% opacity. And the overlay of the mesh on top of the real world view is what tells you how well localized you are. So that's actually a really helpful piece to test. And then if you built an experience, then you can actually use the fused mesh as your datum against which you populate all of your content. And then obviously if the localization is good, you just turn off the datum, and then you only see all the content placed relative to the real world. But yeah, really good question.
Awesome, thank you. And then is VPS optimized for objects and landmarks compared to environments and squares?
Oh, good question. Yeah. So one of the big challenges, or that's not the right. Well, yes, it is a challenge. So the concept of when I was talking about like map building as Sisyphean, it's hard because the world changes every day, but some parts of the world change faster than others. So today, locations that work best on VPS are locations that are distinct and consistent in appearance. So, for example, a square or a building facade or a statue or a mural, those are all really good because, like, especially like let's talk about like a mural, for example. If you go to a mural in your town, your city, there are probably not a lot of murals in the world like it. In most cases, it's unique, which means that if you look at a picture of that mural, you can figure out, okay, I know where I am. But if you wanted to use like a beach or like a part of a lake or something as your location, that's pretty hard because you only have like there's high tide, there's low tide. You have to worry about the like what the foliage looks like if it's the winter and the
Mm,
leaves have fallen off the trees. So locations that work really well on VPS are often man-made or have a lot of man-made features in them that don't change too often. We still have to worry about things like construction, but in general, the best locations today are locations that look pretty much similar regardless of time. Like lighting conditions are fine. We can deal with different lighting conditions, but what works best today are locations that have some man-made features in them.
okay, great. And I think Ramna wanted to add on, like, so I think you kind of answered it though. Does VPS, is it difficult to work in snow or during nighttime? I think you already kind of answered that a little.
Oh yeah, good. Yeah, good questions.
Mhm.
I can answer both those. So, snow is definitely challenging. If the environment is completely blanketed in snow, it's probably not going to work super well. But another cool part about how scanning works and why it's so important to have public locations where you've gotten scan data from a bunch of different users is naturally over time. Uh, if you have a scan of what a location looks like in the snow, that's actually to make it easier for us to localize you if it has snow. Similarly, if you have a location that looks different depending on lighting conditions, like maybe if the sun is in a certain place, it looks very different than if the sun is in another place. If we have scan data over lots of different times of day, that actually makes it a much more robust experience because we can incorporate all those different types of data to tell you where you are. Related to working at night, officially, VPS doesn't really work well at night. Kind of intuitively, because we don't have a lot of scan data at night, it's also much harder to gauge depth at night using even like state of the art computer vision technology. It's pretty tough. So we do not officially support VPS at night. It's really a kind of a limitation of the camera that you're working with. We are getting better, but we want to make sure that we set basically under promise and over deliver in terms of what you and your users are able to interact with. In general, we only recommend building experiences that will work with some daylight, unless you're in a location that has a lot of artificial lighting. Like for example, if it's a building facade that is always lit up at night, it'll probably still work fine. But again, the sort of the rule of thumb here is as long as we have scan data that captures something representative of what that location is going to look like at the time you want it to be used, that's always going to put you in a better position for success in terms of what the experience is going to be like.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thanks, Tori. And then another question. Georeferencing leverages longitude and latitude while VPS is strictly triggered by the activated VPS scan. Is that correct?
I think I understand that question. Yeah. So VPS is always it actually changed the way that VPS works. It's an augmentation of the way that you place and reference the content that you have placed. So it's sort of like a coordinate system thing. Going back to like I know exactly where my car is, that knowing where the car is doesn't matter unless you need to think about context outside the car. So if I just have to choose which seat in the car I want to sit in, that's fine. But if I also want to know like what it looks like across the street, that's where georeferencing becomes a lot more important. The actual operating principle of VPS doesn't change whether or not you're georeferenced, but it makes a huge difference for you as developers in terms of how you can place content and then understand that content in world context.
Awesome. And then we only have 2 minutes left, so this is the final question. Are we thinking about automated content authoring? Let's say I want to put something close to horse statues everywhere around the world. Can we do that?
Great question. Yeah, yeah, that's something we've been talking about a ton. So we have this. We have today about 15, it's somewhere between 15 and 20 million waste spots. So waste spots are locations that have been nominated largely by our community of developers and players, where we know a few pieces of information about all those locations. So we know where they are. We usually have one or two pictures, and then we have a title and a description. But it's really, really helpful for us if we also know a little bit more information. Like, for example, if we have a waste spot and we also know that, oh, this is a park, this is a statue, this is a plaza, that those pieces of information are really helpful for us as well as for the developer community. So if you had an experience that you wanted to, like, hey, this experience works great at a statue, I would love to have a list of all the statues that Niantic has in their database so I can build this experience and deploy it at every statue. So we would call that procedural content generation. And that is actually something that we are going to build on top of remote content authoring. So the first version just means you can go anywhere in the world and see information like the mesh and what it looks like. The next thing that's coming after that is the ability to create procedural content authoring, where you have an experience that only works under these lists of conditions, and then you want to deploy that experience to any location that can accommodate those conditions. So we are building that, and that is another like big challenge, but I think one of the most important things to unlock like truly building for VPS at scale. But fantastic question, and so happy that you're asking that, because that's exactly what we're hearing from a lot of our developers, and like one of the most important things for us to build for all of you.